Hello, hello. Welcome to our third starter deck in the series of videos we're doing here, and this time it's going to be Lyra. Lyra is a faction that is probably my favorite flavor-wise. If you're familiar with Final Fantasy XIV, I am a longtime Bard main, and so sort of obviously the pink harp faction with some random effects is I'm kind of contractually obligated to like them, right? And I think their gameplay is pretty interesting, especially with all their X0, X stat lines. It's kind of fun to play with the biomes like that. But anyway, if this is the first one of these videos that you've checked into, basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through the cards that are in the finalized starter deck that Equinox has been showing off the final starter decks in these last couple weeks leading up to the Kickstarter. We're just going to look at their whole families, even if the rares aren't in the starter deck, just to get an idea of what different rares, different faction ships might look like. And sort of at our end goal of this is to bring up the starter deck, the list as it is, and imagine we are a budget new player deciding we're just going to pick up 3x of a starter to start the game, so that we have 3 copies of all the 1x rares that are in those, and then we're going to try to make a deck out of them, which means ultimately we're going to pick 5 rares, we're just going to 3x them and not think too hard about it. And then we might have to cut some things, and so there's going to be 8 different rares, we're going to pick 5 of them and make any other cuts we need to, and see where that leads us. So, first things first, the first card we have up here, well, first thing is obviously the hero herself, Nevenka, with Blotch. And yeah, we're rolling dice. Pretty balanced of the outcomes here. If you roll a 6, you get anchored. If you roll a 1, your character goes to the reserve. So, ostensibly these are two sides of the same coin. Obviously, in terms of planning, having the random one just kind of blow up your plans is a little rougher than your opponent's ability to just know, like, okay, going to the next day, I'm going to have this anchored thing here. But the rest of the time you get a boost, and that is also can be pretty impactful. So you don't necessarily be slamming that every day. You probably want to make sure that the boost is going to be relevant, or you have a character that just doesn't matter, so you might as well try to anchor them, that sort of thing. But most days you will be using this, I believe. So, and naturally, we're going to see a bunch more dice effects in the deck. Case in point, Ouroboros Trickster. 2 cost, 1 cost, 2 boosts on a coin flip, and 1 boost otherwise. So, it tracks, right? You pay 2 and 1, and you're probably going to get a 2/2/2 once and a 1/1/1 once. But you might, if you're lucky, you'll do a little bit better than that. If you're not lucky, you'll do a little bit worse than that. Really just sort of a character that embodies the dice rolling nature of this deck. The rare upgrade changes that to 3 boosts and says you don't get to have a 1 cost 3/3/3. She still costs 2 from the reserve. And so, once again, the average outcome is you're going to pay 4 total mana for 4/4/4 total stats across the 2 plays. If you get lucky, it's a little more exciting. You're getting 2 more stats than you might have gotten otherwise. If you're unlucky, then you're paying 2 more mana than you might have otherwise. Kind of just ups the stakes. Depending, maybe if in the rest of the set there are some effects that increase your die rolls or something besides the Ouroboros that we're going to see later, this might be more enticing. I'm not sure I feel great about it. It is in this deck. This might not be one of the 3x's we pick, but it depends on what else there is. And we'll get to that when we go over the whole deck later. Faction Shift is just into Bravos, and this looks like a filler kind of thing because Bravos has no clear interaction with this, but at least from the starter cards, I don't believe Bravos has anything shaped like a 2 cost, 1 cost. So this could be filling a hole in that way, even though the effect of the card and even the stats that you're getting don't feel very Bravosy, right? Next we have Hathor. This is a really fun one. So 2 cost, 3/3/0. We're going to see a lot of this, where we get a higher 2 stats that are above what you're expecting to get for the mana, but the other one is 0. And so they're really, all of these are not very good on day 1, because your opponent can cause a double advance just by putting actually anything opposite them, as long as it's not also an X0 kind of thing. But, when you play it on relevant terrain, like a single forest, a single mountain, the forest mountain, or even, if you need mountain water and they're on the single forest, right? It sounds like it's only relevant half the time, but as you get into the game, more often than not, these XE or X's have some place you can put them that actually tracks the way you need it to. And that's going to be the case for all of these. Anyway, she has a super cool support ability. She can discard out of your reserve to go pick up your other reserve, or one of your other reserve if you've done a resupply. Kind of a neat tool to have in your pocket. Gets better if you have things with lower hand costs and higher reserve costs, perhaps, or from hand only effects. 3 costs coming out of the reserve is sort of a balancing point against having that ability. It's not one of those support abilities that you're kind of always going to use, so that 3 cost is relevant coming out of there, but the impact of that, if you're playing her in the right places, you pay 3 costs for not a 3/3/3, but it could be 3 in the things that matter to you. So it's kind of just fine, right? She'll come out, she'll be on rate. The rare upgrade amends that situation, lets her be a 2/2 with this stat line. And I believe this one is not in the starter, so we don't have to think about it in that context. And in Izmir faction shift, Izmir getting an efficient character, potentially, and with that reserve pickup, and they have a lot of spell, they have Off You Go, for instance, as a 2/4 spell. They have some things like that going on, where picking up something like that out of the reserve might be useful. So kind of an interesting card for the Izmir. I wonder if that'll even be one of the faction shifts in the Izmir deck. I could see it. Next we have Lyra Scald, and this is the common of this is just a straight up 2/2/3/0/2. You you think the rare Hathor is rare because it lets you get a 2/2/3/0/3. So a common Lyra Scald getting you 2/2/3/0/2 just makes sense. Not much to say. A little bit more restrictive in that you only get the super stats in forest. So like a mountain water situation, it's less good, but still fine, right? 2 for 2. The rare upgrade has all sorts of stuff on it. So let's see. You can trade out a card from your reserve, which is interesting, right? We were just talking about Hathor having the higher cost out of reserve and not necessarily being that exciting. And you can also discard the Scald itself from your reserve to get a sort of an accelerate a mana. Pretty interesting. These kinds of rares are a little hard to rate because it's not as easy as like, oh, well, I pay this much more mana to get this much more stats, or I save a mana and I still get these stats or whatever, and you can compare what stats you're getting. This is just like a bunch of utility stuff that, I'm not the biggest resupply fan in the world. I've said that in another video, but getting to, and this is when you play him, you get to swap out, just a useless card in your reserve, and you're not, it's not like you're paying extra for that aside from, I guess, the rare slot. And then when he goes back, the support ability, another thing about support abilities and these 0 costs is that you might not have 2 chances over the course of a game to play one of these 0 cost characters and feel good about it. So anytime there's a support ability on one of these, you're pretty happy. And burning him for a little extra mana efficiency could be quite good. And once again, it's an Izmir faction shift. And the full rare, they get the full rare out of this just because, they wouldn't really be interested in the common anyway. And you get all of those little tricks in economy in Izmir. It doesn't not fit, right? It makes some sense. Next is Tanuki. So this is, Lyra gets a Sabotage card. I think most of these decks are going to have a Sabotage card, if not all of them, probably. I mean, maybe Muno won't. And in, similar to other Sabotage cards, you're ostensibly 1 mana inefficient, right? We've seen paying 2 for a 3/3/0 is kind of okay. Now we're paying 3 for a 3/3/0, but we get a Sabotage attached. And again, if you can manage to put this down in a place where the water doesn't matter, you're getting this Sabotage for awfully free. So certainly a good card for sure. The rare upgrade gives you this very funny, you can Sabotage on the second play, pending a coin flip, right? Pending a die roll, you need to roll a 4 or higher. That's pretty interesting. This one is in the starter deck, and once again, it's not a statistical thing. It's a what is the game impact of this thing in deciding whether to run it or not. It's kind of a neat one. And then the rare is a Bravo shift. We talked about how efficient this guy can be. Bravos is, sort of efficient characters is kind of their thing. So I think it tracks there. I don't know how many. They have some X0Xs too, so maybe if you're playing, I believe their Pathfinder is missing Forest, so if you have like that, and maybe something's low on Mountain, and this kind of rounds you out in terms of your paired things. Next one is Esmeralda. 2 cost 220, 022 specifically. Has the resupply. The rare lets you pay 3 from reserve to get another resupply when you play her again. I feel like you probably need to feel pretty thin on cards to be doing that, right? You need to be playing stuff that's going to be a lot of fleeting things or stuff like that, but those cards certainly exist or can exist. And if you value resupply more than I tend to, this could be pretty alright. But in general, probably not the best card in your deck. And the rare upgrade, yeah, I don't know. I feel like 3 for a 0/2/2 to get a resupply is not the most efficient thing in the world. I believe this rare is in the starter too. I might be wrong, but not my favorite thing. Muna, I believe, I don't remember if Muna has a bunch of. They have some support abilities that might benefit from triggering a resupply. And, Lyra has some of the support abilities too, but it's fine. It is kind of a fine starter card. If resupply is better than I am calling it, then it is better than fine. Oh, Lyra Cloth Dancers. This rare is not in the starter, but it's very spicy. Up front, you get a 3 cost 0/3/2, a little inefficient, but you get to give something fleeting. You give one of your opponent's characters fleeting, so you're effectively reducing them by half a card, right? And don't worry about the fact that I'm calling it half a card, but you get this disruption ability for relatively low cost, right? Again, the Lyra Scald is a 2 cost, 3/0/2, and so paying 1 mana effectively to say you're only going to get that character once seems quite good. There is some timing complexity to it. If you are going first, you don't get to lead with this. If they play something out of their reserve and that has fleeting, then on your second turn you don't get to play this and have an impact. So it's a little hard to actually catch somebody with this. But the rare version, which once again has those same timing complexities, sort of even more so, but it gives all of their stuff fleeting. And even just like putting this in your deck and making your opponent worry about it might just have value. It could be one of those things, because I don't know how often you're actually going to nail 2 characters with this. But if the reason you never nail 2 characters is because your opponent is playing around it, that's going to have some value for you. Certainly a very loud ability. you think of, it's one of those cards where you think of the Magical Christmas Land plays, and they're like, oh my god, I could do this. It probably won't actually happen very often, but the fact that it's there does mean something. Muna gets this as the rare shift, the faction shift. It's kind of a neat pseudo removal for them, kind of a neat way for them to remove a character, and sort of part of their flavor is they don't just shoot guys down, right? So this gives them another option to do that besides what we'll see in the deck itself, which I believe is a sleep card we've seen. We'll cover that a couple days here. Chronicler, this is right in the same vein of a lot of the other commons. It is a 3 cost 4/4, so if you're playing around the biomes, it's effectively the same as a 3 cost 4/4, which is quite good. But you have to play around the biomes. Kind of interesting, another rare upgrade that is not stat-based. I think a lot of these just aren't stat-based, which is going to make picking Lyra rares really, really interesting. This one's not in the starter, but she can just get out of your reserve and become something else. Which, again, if you only have that one chance to play this with the biomes lining up just the right way, you're very happy to be able to just turn her into something else out of your reserve. And Axiom gets that full effect. Axiom has a bit of a resupply theme, so this is pretty cool for them. I mean, if you resupply into her, you can just resupply into something else in an Axiom deck, and that's kind of funny. And, Lyra can do, we've seen some resupply here. Lyra can do some of that too. With the Ouroboros Croupier, if I'm pronouncing France word good. 4 costs 0/4/4, so a full mana over the Chronicler there. Roll a die on 4, Lyra, draw a card, otherwise resupply. I like this ability. This is cool. I don't know how good it is, but I guess, you know, if you're paying a mana to draw a card, we're pretty happy about that. The difference between drawing a card and resupplying is not only do you maybe get to play it twice, but also if it's just not a good card, then that can just be your mana drop the next day. Right, so you get the options like that. But, you know, if you ended up paying 1 extra for a resupply, at least it's better than, you know, it's certainly better than nothing for sure. It's a nice compensation for losing your die roll. It's not one of those abilities where you either roll a 4 or you get nothing, so that's kind of cool. 4 cost is, of course, a big chunk to be spending, but, you know, you're probably going to have some of these 4 costs in your deck, and this is a pretty nice one. The rare version, hey, we do have some stats. We go up to a 0/5/5 and feel much better about our 4 costs. We're not necessarily paying anything extra for our draw or resupply, and you know, it's not like we're sort of paying extra relative to the Hathor before, but now we're right on curve, but still kind of efficient if we're playing the biomes, etc., the same usual thing, and we get the reserve effect of refunding a mana. So that seems like a pretty good one. I like this rare bunch. It's not in the starter deck, but it's one I could see myself using in like a constructed situation. And once again, anything that's sort of resupply themed seems to be getting this Axiom faction shift. All the same power as the Lyra is pretty good. Alright, the rest are on the other page. We have the Hatter, speaking of 4 costs, 5/5/0s. This one is 5 out of your reserve, but he has a very powerful support ability where he just gets to anchor something. And your character is boosting some things, right? Or you could have a Trickster that you got a nice roll on. We'll talk about some other cards later. He's good for sure. You could play him out of your reserve for 5, but you're probably going to use him to anchor something. He'll get sabotaged a lot for sure. But yeah, 4 costs for the 5/5/0 is a good line. Good support ability, produces a good card all around. The rare, not in the starter, very funny. He goes from not being able to swim to not being able to do mountains. Not quite sure how that works, but it seems appropriately chaotic for what this character is. And you do get the little cost change out of the reserve. Otherwise, not getting a whole lot. I don't know if you're ever going to like... This is one of those rares where you might 1 or 2 exit and still play 1 or 2 of the common, just to sort of keep your opponent a little on edge. They might think like, oh, I saw a rare Hatter. If they're playing 3 of it, then I need to try to think about they might drop 5 on a water somewhere, and then, oh, there's the common Hatter. Now I'm going to drop 5 on the mountain. You can kind of do some funky stuff with that, but I don't know if that's actually going to be worth the rare slot. Maybe it's worth a 1. If you're kind of have your 14 rares figured out, not sure where the 15th is going to be, I could see it. Bravos for the faction shift, and Bravos also likes to boost things, is quite happy to see an anchor effect like this. Obviously, it's cost 3 or less restricted, but they have some pretty nice ones for sure. And we saw physical training, they could make one really big and anchor it. This is a pretty interesting card for Bravos, I think. Asmodeus. What was interesting is a 6 drop. You're putting a lot into him, but if you win the die roll, you get an anchored character. And so if you anchor him, you put a boost on him with Navenka. You're probably taking a hit this day, right? Anytime you put 6 down on a character, you're giving your opponent a lot of reactive power to figure out what they need to do to maximize their outcome for that day. But then you have this giant body out there starting the next day, and you can probably make up for it, and possibly and then some is sort of the idea. Now, if you lose the anchor, you just get a giant character for a day, and I hope Navenka can anchor him, because paying 6 for just a pile of stats seems good, even if they're efficient stats, but that time situation means it can backfire pretty badly on you. The rare makes him a 5/5/4/4/4, which is net more attractive for a lot of the reasons I just talked about. You can play a 5 and another card one whole day earlier in the game. You have a little more capacity to play around it. If he doesn't get anchored, you might be able to drop something on the other side to bail yourself out, or drop something first and then play this guy. All of that stuff. I think that mana cost reduction is pretty big. We've seen some cards in here that trim a mana also out of the reserve. I don't remember which, if any of those are in the starter deck, but that's another thing you can do here. I think it's a pretty big difference. I think it's a net improvement even with the stat drop, because what you're really looking for is the anchored body on the table here. Bravos gets just the full common version as a rare shift. I don't think they naturally get any anchored characters, so this gives them a big, expensive one to try to play with, and maybe they'll ramp into it or something. The next one is All In. This rare is not in the starter. Pretty straightforward. 3-cost spell, 3 costs out of reserve, roll a die, get those boosts. If you roll a 1 on this, you feel awful. If you roll a 2 on this, it's not very efficient. You're really, same as everything else, you're really looking for the 4 or more. Roll a 3, you're okay. So this is usually okay to play, but it comes with all the caveats of any other, play spell, get boost kind of thing. The rare upgrade is really neat. You roll the die first, then if the result wasn't high enough, you can burn a card from your reserve to increase its result. And we've seen a bunch of resupply in this deck. You might just have things there that you don't want to play out of reserve. This is a pretty... Is this a good upgrade? I think this is probably a pretty good rare upgrade. It turns it... If you're playing All In, then you're expecting to use it, right? You're expecting to get something out of it, and making that pretty reliable with the rare seems like it would be worth doing. The faction shift is Bravos, and it basically an alternative to their physical training if they want to have more of a chance to have a random power spike, I guess. This next one's pretty neat. This is Paint Prison. I just realized that the thing getting imprisoned changes across the rarities. That's pretty funny. But this is an interesting piece of removal. 5 costs for removal is a lot, because if you're not removing a 5-cost character, you're kind of losing on the mana trade there. You can discard a card from your reserve to improve that situation. And, again, some of the cards we've seen might just get stuck in your reserve and not feel very useful out of there, so that seems just fine. And now you're paying a 3-cost, fleeting plus a card from your reserve, so a really expensive card advantage-wise. But you get to just kind of ship anything out of there. The other downside, so to say, is that you're putting it on top of their deck. Which, depending on what it is, right? If it's something really crucial, then having them just being able to play it the next day might matter. But it's not like it's going to their hand where they can just play it immediately, so that's pretty cool. The rare upgrade is interesting. It seems tailored towards if you don't expect to have too many dead cards in your reserve, then you'll be able to just play this for 4 and just get there that way. And you can still return, lose the reserve and get it at 3 cost as usual, but just kind of helps you if you think you're really going to like your reserve, but you still want to put this card in your deck. The faction shift is once again giving Muna a kind of funny shaped removal spell. This one does just kind of point to something and send it away, but it's putting it on the top of the deck. It's not banishing it, right? So it's still kind of on theme. And then we get to our permanent, the Lyra Bastion. We talked about the Axiom one when we did the Axiom deck. The common to rare is a 1 cost reduction, and for a permanent, when you are giving up a lot of advantage to put this down, you're paying mana to do actually nothing to the field. Any sort of cost reduction is welcome. It improves your ability to sort of play the permanent and still do other things and get out of the day. Ideally with a 1/1, right? Each player advances, but you at the very least don't get too owed, right? And at 4 cost, you're a pretty decent bit more likely to get beaten up for that. So the upgrade makes sense. The actual effect is So it increases the chance of getting an anchored on Navenka from like 16% to 30%. So it can be the difference between I will probably get an anchor off at some point during the game versus I might just never get it. And my character just becomes sort of a boost bot that might blow up in my face. It also makes it much less likely that it's going to blow up in your face, so you do get to just spam Navenka all the time. All those cards we saw get with those 4+ effects get a little more, certainly not guaranteed, but a little more likely. They become, what, 75% chances instead of 50. Your all-ins get better, etc., etc. Is that worth the, is it, first of all, is it worth the deck slot, and then is it worth the rare slot? It's really hard to evaluate because it's all random chance stuff, but it does feel good to have this out and to be Lyra and to just feel like the feathers are off and you just kind of slam all these die roll effects and hope it goes well. And then the 2 faction shifts into this deck. I will talk about off you go first. Very simple. We get the 1x, nice cheaper form of removal that's not fleeting, that's not gonna blow us out mana-wise, unless we try to play it from the reserve. It's a pretty good target for that pickup from reserve character. Actually think I mentioned Off You Go specifically earlier. So that's just fine. It's nice to have something that's not Paint Prison. It's a little bit different shaped. And then the other one coming in, this guy's really funny. So whatever the Izmir one of this does, I believe it's whenever you cast a spell. For Lyra, whenever you roll dice, he gets a boost. So just up front, provided you're using Navenka that turn, you're getting a 2-cost 2/2 into a 1-cost 2/2. So he's actually just efficient, and he has all the stats. He doesn't have any 0 holes, so he can be a nice all-rounder that the deck is mostly doesn't have much of otherwise. And if you do anything else, so you play any of those roll dice characters, or do an all-in or anything like that, then you get a super efficient character. You have the 2-cost 3/3/3 or the 1-cost 3/3/3 that we were supposedly not allowed to have with the rare trickster, right? So he's very nice. He's very good. I think that he's probably the easiest slam dunk to actually go into our pick 5 out of 8 rares. And so let's get right to that. Bring this up. So this is what I wound up doing. I actually took all 3 of the 1x rares and put those up to 3x. And because we did that, we actually had to cut a couple cards entirely. So first things first, we're essentially playing rare Off You Go over rare Paint Prison, or rare or common Paint Prison. I think one of the things about this deck is you'll notice there is not a single character in here that costs 1 from hand. We have 2 that cost 1 from reserve, and that's it. That's our only way to pay 1 for something. And going up the curve, we have a couple 4s, we have a 5. We're trying to get this permanent down at some point, maybe. And it's not the cheapest deck, and so I'm a little bit worried about our ability to actually afford Paint Prison on a regular basis. The 3 and if we don't have a reserve right now, right, we won't even be able to do it, right? Or if we care about the card that's in there. So getting that from 3 or 4 maybe to 2, and yeah, it's more restrictive. You can only hit certain things with it, but I think having that 2 mana to do something with is going to be a little bit more easy than being able to do anything with Paint Prison deep into a day. And then for everything else, so the Mage Dancer is just a slam dunk. We had to cut another card. I cut Esmeralda. I already told you I didn't like her. I don't trust resupply. I probably should give it more value. Well, the cards are tuned to give it more value than I do, right? That's just how it is. So probably I'm wrong. That's probably what it means. And that leaves us, so with Esmeralda and Paint Prison out, we only actually have a few other rares to consider that we're picking. I think it's like 3 out of 4 or something like that. We picked Asmodeus. Talked about that. I think he feels much better as a 5-cost than as a 6-cost. You don't really care about the stat reduction for what he's doing. And then we have the Trickster, Tanuki, and the Bastion. I decided to take the Bastion because the thing I talked about with those 1-cost means it's pretty hard for you to... you actually literally can't play 2 characters on day 1. So your options are either playing one character, and if it's not one of your 2-drops, it's going to have a 0 stat on it, right? So you can play a 3-drop day 1. You're probably, if they can play 2 characters, they're probably going to 2-1 you. If you can play one of the 2-drops and they can play 2 characters, they might 1-0 you, right? Depending on how the stats fall. And Navenka can change that. Navenka can boost something up, especially Mage Dancer. Like Mage Dancer plus Navenka is probably a fine day 1, where you just say, well, here's my 2-cost 3/3/3. We're probably going to 1-1 this. But if you don't have the Mage Dancer in your opening hand, I could see having opening hands where the best thing to actually do is to put that Bastion down day 1, get 2-0'd if it comes to it, and try to make it up with your RNG getting better. Won't feel great. You'll be playing from behind the whole game for sure, but given what's available, I think I want to have the option in the deck. And then, of course, you know, if you get into a later turn, maybe something anchored, and you got effectively a bit of a mana refund that allows you to play this out and still not get beat up that day. I think it's a fine include. It's really pretty. It feels good. This is just our getting started with the game deck theoretically anyway, and it's more fun. And so then it just comes down to Trickster versus Tanuki. It's kind of a tough call. I think you can make a case either way. I took the Tanuki just because even if I sort of like the idea of even if we never play this guy out of our reserve, making our opponent play around a face-up, maybe sabotage, could get us some kind of intangible value. So I took the rare upgrade on that instead of the, you know, random chance stats on Trickster, with the expectation that we will never actually play Tanuki out of our reserve unless we need the stats or we really, really need to sabotage something. But we're pretty happy just to leave him there, actually. And so yeah, that's what I would do with this deck. We have 3 more to go. It should be Muna, Ortis, and Izmir in that order. I'm kind of interested to see how this deck plays when it comes out or when it goes on print and play or whatever. I assume the print and play will be 30-card decks, and this will be sort of a full release on the release date, because the other decks that we've seen have those 1-drops, right? And sort of playing the game without them. And it's not that the demo decks don't have this dynamic too, but as a fully realized deck that's gone through some balancing work, it'll be interesting to see how this plays against some of the other decks on the list. But yeah, that's all for this video. Next up will be the Muna deck. I'm planning for Tuesday on that, and we'll take it from there. Yeah, have a good night.